Hello and welcome back to our well-defended domain in the stars, me compadres. There's ever so much work to be done today and so little time, eh, Wart? Let's get to it. I'm not gonna beat around the bush or sugarcoat anything today, friends. We are starting off very hot and heavy by building ourselves a Hammerhead-class starship. And just in case you think that I would botch the design of this ship, as you can see I actually have the blueprint just a little bit to the left here for comparison's sake in terms of its scale and its design. With our army of clones building away, it wouldn't take very long at all to get the outer shell and the internal hull of the ship complete. But now it's time for us to begin working on the internal portions of the ship, the guts of the ship if you will, with some batteries, our nuclear engines, as well as about 3 or so fission reactors to keep this bad boy powered. Realistically, every ship needs a heart, and I find it best that this one has triple. We would also take a good bit of time to go about finishing up the rest of the internal portions of the ship as well. Plenty of heat sink areas, a shield generator, some weapon systems, and of course some places for our crew to sleep. Because of course the ship needs to be able to defend itself, but we also need it to be able to haul any resources that we get from, well, the surface of the planet or perhaps a ship battle, but also we need somewhere for all of our clones to sleep, as you could imagine. Last but not least, we chucked in the old brains of the ship itself and also a life support system, and we also threw in our console so that we could pilot this bad boy. Nothing too fancy, just your standard Hammerhead warship. We've built many of these throughout the Empire, and we have our clone army using them in other quadrants of the galaxy, yada yada yada. However, this particular warship is actually going to have a hyperdrive, the same hyperdrive that we had taken from the pirate vessel that we commandeered, deconstructed, you remember from episode 1 I'm sure. And speaking of which, not to worry, as we would also move in the pirates who are sleeping in their cryo-sleep caskets into the warhead as well. Still not quite sure what we're going to do with them, but they'll be tagging along for the ride. You know who else is going to be tagging along for the ride though? Good old Wart. We can't just leave his brain in this pod on the station. No, I'm afraid we can't leave our companion, our old general, and, well, whatever's left of him, I suppose, behind. Along with the Emperor and Wart is the Emperor's elite guard, but we will also be taking our new squad of clones that we created last episode as well. They'll need the experience, so of course we do plan on sending them on some special missions. And they'll get to work hand in hand with the Emperor himself. Lucky dogs. But before we go off gallivanting around in our new warship, we do need to give our station a proper name. Suggested by our friend the Event Horizon 909, we have the Haven Station in reference to the Haven-class medical stations from Star Wars, an excellent name if I do say so myself, and thus Haven Station is born. Well, it's been born, you know what I mean. Not to worry though, they'll be able to take care of themselves up here in orbit, especially because we're going to be leaving behind our fleet of gunships to them. We have more than enough current clones to defend the station with all of their guns and their numerous copious amounts of numbers and manpower. Of course, we have our superior Archotech shield along with all of our plasma cannons and railgun cannons and cannons galore essentially to defend it. But since we're taking Wart, we do need to build a computer core aboard the station. That way we have a new AI for the station itself to go about taking care of things. Not only will this minimize the amount of work that the clones need to put into maintenance and other things to make sure that the station doesn't fall out of the sky, but also, this also makes sure that our surrogate droids are running properly and up to par and not accidentally squishing any clone babies or letting them starve to death, that sort of thing. They were previously connected to Wart, so if we left without creating a new station AI, they would essentially just be nothing but tin cans again. The station's new AI is going to be named Camino, and you may have already seen this a moment ago, but this is yet another homage to Star Wars. I'm sure you already know that one though. But without further ado, my friends, it is time for us to take our Hammerhead ship down to the planet's surface, away from the station. Again though, there is no cause for alarm, as as the station is still in orbit and is actually going to be floating around up there the entire time that we are on the surface, so if we were to maybe need to call in some reinforcements, we could do so, or if we just want to pop in for a visit to make sure the cloning process is up to par. But we have finally arrived at our destination on the northern polar ice caps of the planet. A barren, frozen landscape where there is quite literally nothing here, other than ice, that is, of course, and we are pretty far away from any other faction settlement. This is where we'll be setting up our imperial capital on the city, as well, to be honest with you, we just really like a challenge. Which, as you can see, is the exact same reason we didn't bring any of the resources that we had on Haven Station down to the surface with us either. Just as always, we plan on making our own way. But, if you'll excuse me, I spot something in the sky. Well, if it isn't the Covenant, come to check out the ship landed near them, I suppose. This should be fun. Well, that was kinda boring. They were so easily taken down, I'm afraid. And they were so weak with such pathetic armor and weapons, I don't even think it would be worth turning them into slaves of the Empire. We had considered turning them into a grunt and brute sorbet or stew of sorts, but they also left plenty of meals, so I suppose we'll eat those instead. And even though their weapons weren't anything useful to us and they were quite weak, we could take them and sell them perhaps just to make some silver, just so we could fund our imperial projects, I suppose. Some of them, though, were a little bit nostalgic, you could say, for some of our compadres like Wart here. In case you're wondering, he used to be a Sangheili general in the Covenant, and then, of course, he had turned to Void after almost being killed, yada yada, he's our friend now, don't worry about it. Though as we gaze upon our new pile of junk, I do begin to realize that these dropships might come in handy, especially since we don't currently have the resources to build our own gunships. I suppose they're better than nothing for the time being, and it might be a bit of fun, who knows. First though, we need to begin some cleanup efforts and spend some time hauling in all of our junk inside, like the silver and all the weapons that we had previously mentioned before we use the ships. With that completed, it's time for us to head out and pay a visit to our old friends, the organization. Yes indeed, good old Void is once again going to hand over, you could say, their resources and their lives to us. Though, as you well know, we do plan on acquiring their resources by force. It's not as if they're just going to hand them over. As we were engaging with their defenses and we began to infiltrate their little fortress here, we decided that we would split up into two groups. The Emperor and his elite guard entourage, as well as our new squad. They can't be hanging off the Emperor's hip the whole time. Ah, this sure is fun, isn't it? Such a shame it can't last forever. With all of their associates, bodyguards, and grinders, and whatever else they call their soldiers, dead, well, the only thing really stopping us were their mutants, and they were quite easy to take care of as well. Making getting these resources back in our little dropships here nothing but child's play. Now, the hard part is getting all these resources hauled into our Hammerhead warship, and this is going to take an extremely long amount of time, given the amount of items that we've taken, of course. So much so, in fact, that at one point I thought it would actually just be a much better idea if we left all those resources on the ground and started working on our city while they're laying out there, instead of getting them hauled in anyway, because, well, we're going to be using them regardless. The very first building that we would actually begin working on was going to be the palace of the Emperor himself. Something of a capital building, I suppose, in our capital city, you could say. Even given all of our manpower and given all of our abundance of resources, this process took an extremely long time, mostly due in part to the fact that all of the flooring was some type of polished or fine flooring, which takes more resources and more time. Nothing but the best for our Emperor though. As you can see, we actually have 4 main sections of the palace. We have our throne room, which is adorned with many braziers, as well as several hyperweave rugs, couches, and even some curtains. Many pews and lighting, even with the finest steel and gold throne that this planet has to offer. We also have our dining room with some very exotic tables and chairs that are nice and comfortable, as well as chess tables to entertain ourselves as well as our guest. If we were to maybe have some diplomats over from the UNSC or something, we also have a few pianos in there so our clones can entertain them with music as well. We also have the Emperor's quarters with his bed and basic commodities like that. He also has his very own bar, an extremely large television, tabletop game, holodeck, essentially just many different things to entertain him in between his day-to-day duties of governing the entire galaxy, or at least the parts that we currently control. Last but not least, the 4th section of the palace is actually something of a planning and communications room where we can go about communicating with our fleets, our generals, our armies, and also planning out attacks in different parts of the galaxy. You understand. Not exactly perfect, but it is a very good start of a palace on this planet, and also a very good start to the capital city here, I feel. Specifically since this isn't our home world, and of course it is only one of the many planets under our control. The next thing we began working on were some actual defenses around the palace in the form of some very large charge railguns on each side of the palace itself. After that, we started working on a very durable and tough high security fence around the entire city. Now this is temporary, and I do want to replace it after a while with some proper walls and other defenses, but this will help us outline the place for now. We began building some simple asphalt roads as well to just kind of help us with how we're going to be laying out our structures. We don't normally use all that many ground vehicles, except maybe some speeders, so I suppose they'll be useful for that though. We would once again begin building around our palace though. This time around we're actually going to be building something of a resource depot where we can park many of our gunships, a cruiser, and also just some small Imperial shuttles. Now this little depot for the time being is actually going to be how we travel back and forth between places such as, say for example, our Haven station in orbit. Now of course throughout this process we were occasionally getting quite a few raids from Void and the pirates and other factions, but in particular Void was realistically the only one that we needed to worry about, it would seem. I had noticed that our new squad of clones were actually taking quite a bit of damage when encountering the organization. Seems like there should be something we can do to counteract this. And indeed, I believe there is something we can do about it. We immediately began working on a brand new laboratory and/or manufacturing building, one that is more akin to the Imperium of Man than the Empire, I believe. It's time that we begin delving and dabbling with a few machine spirits and some other odd things that the Imperium has, such as their wonderful armor. I introduce to you, my friends, our very own clone Marines. I mean, they already have insane fighting skills, augmentations, and genetics. We might as well give them the armor to match. And as a matter of fact, we went ahead and gave the entire squad their very own types of this Marine armor. Our very first clone Marine squad, I might add. Something of a personal pet project to the Emperor, I'm sure. And who knows, if the results of this yield quite well, and you guys like the video, we might end up doing more with him, possibly even a spin-off series. But now that we have our squad somewhat complete, we also need a name. Luckily, our friend the Grizzly Giant 7495 has a name suggestion in the form of Clone Force 99, which I believe is also a reference to the Bad Batch, and I very much like it. And thus that that is what we're going to be calling them. I initially was just going to call them the Bad Batch, but I thought that it might be a little too on the nose, so we'll stick with Clone Force 99. I also wanted to mention that these clone Marines are based on a meme that I saw on Twitter, which is pretty funny, but also very inspirational, of course, and you should also follow me on Twitter, by the way. With that taken care of, it was time for us to continue working on our city, making more improvements and building something of a large warehouse, and something else that I think may end up being something of a workshop. To be honest with you, I'm not exactly sure what I want to do with these buildings, so I'll handle that off screen. We were also getting quite low on certain resources, and I knew that we had them, I just didn't know where we had put them. So when I was deconstructing these shabby old Covenant dropships, I ended up finding them all. But this isn't exactly a city building series. I know that there's a good portion of you fine folks who want to see some action, and that's exactly what I'm going to give you. Void has continued their expansion on this planet despite our best efforts from the cloning facilities and our armies, and thus increased their iron grip. They've even managed to settle a base not too far from our capital city, and thus because of this, we're going to be sending out our new squad, the Clone Force 99, to take care of them. Cue the montage. Well, that sure was fun, huh? Perhaps one of the best parts, though, is that our squad, along with one ship, has managed to take out a huge chunk of the organization's forces and bases. Meanwhile, back at our polar ice-capped city, we are going to be building some proper power plants to keep this city fueled and to keep our lights, as well as all of our weapon systems, online. Now, initially, I was only going to build one of these power plants, with it solely being nuclear power, but then I realized that we also had an absolute shit ton of the Void Tech power cells in the Hammerhead cruiser, and thus I decided to build a backup power station out of those specifically. Now, I didn't crunch the numbers on exactly how much power we're going to be making here, but I'm pretty sure that we could power half of the planet. I don't know though. I do know though that as we continue our genocide against the organization known as Void and the Covenant forces, of course, in tandem with the UNSC's help, we're going to have a lot of bodies that need disposed of, and thus we're going to be burning them, because burning or blowing up the corpses of Void associates is the only way to keep them from reviving. We also wanted to build a shuttle bay for the city's security forces. Now, originally I was going to build some of the skip ships, as they are commonly the ships that we'll use, but instead I actually decided to go with some of the shuttles, as they can be upgraded with multiple different types of plasma, laser, and just normal uranium turret weaponry. But most importantly, perhaps, is the fact that these shuttles can go into what's called a hover mode and essentially drive like a ground vehicle, such as a speeder, and monitor the premises of the city. Speaking of which, we would also end up building several barrage cannon turrets around both sides of the entrances of the city, mostly for show, as our army and even the Emperor himself are really the the true defense and backbone behind any defendable territory here. Speaking of which though, once we begin getting more clones into the city as well as Imperials, now that we are creating a true empire once more on this planet, we need jobs for them. We need places for them if they were to get injured, and we also need a recreational area for them. So we essentially built something of a poker hall for them. We ended up building something of a small manufacturing plant, as well as a pretty decent sized hospital. Obviously though, for the residents of the city, which is mostly going to consist of our military forces being this the capital city, or at least a makeshift capital city for this planet, we also need some residential housing for them, which we quickly ended up building as well. Nothing too fancy, once again, all gray and dull with a few beds and places to eat and a few couches with some televisions to try to keep them entertained. To truly keep them entertained though, I also thought that next to the poker hall we could maybe have something of a bar, a little cantina of sorts where you could go and wet your whistle. Though the clones may be quite expendable and whatnot, they also like to have a drink every now and then, if you know what I mean. Naturally, we also finished up this corner of the city with a hydroponics area where we'll be growing all of the food for the city, and we also built a laboratory for any research projects that we may need to do. While we were here, we had a small pack of wild huskies wander into the area, and we decided to take pity on them. Sure, we're genocidal maniacs trying to take over the galaxy, but we do love doggos. Man's best friend stays consistent anywhere in this universe, baby. But now for the true coup de grace of the city. Half of this entire city, if not more than that realistically, is going to be a gigantic landing port for our Hammerhead cruisers. These ships are a vital backbone for taking over any planet as well as quadrants of a galaxy, and thus why we are going to have a large portion of this area be a port for them where we can work on them and command them, essentially, helping us keep a firm grip on the throats of the masses. But then after doing so, I realized that this city really doesn't have any aerial defenses, or at least not yet. So around the Emperor's Palace and then around the city and other areas as well, we ended up building some very large laser turrets similar to what you would actually see on the cruisers themselves. And with those, as well as the ones throughout the city, I think we shouldn't have any issue with void drop pods falling down on us, as we can blast them out of the sky. But ladies and gentlemen, with that, our capital city is finally complete. Hardly a capital, I understand, but on a backwater planet like this, it really doesn't take much. We just need some type of command post to govern from. But even with the completion of our city, we still have many threats to the planet, such as the organization, as well as the torturous marauders, who are like a rat infesting this planet in every single corner, and extremely hard to exterminate because they constantly pop back up, probably even worse so than Void. By this point, many of the deserter Imperials have decided to change their minds a bit, as they really don't have any other government to turn to, and thus we are going to be equipping the masses with some proper Imperial weapons and armor, and allowing them to fight for us. Of course, they're not going to be very good at fighting off the organization, but the torturous marauders, I think that they might just stand a chance. Standing shoulder to shoulder with our clones, the Imperials will be a healthy addition to our forces. This is their home, after all. Our capital city is built, the shattered empire of this planet is rebuilt, and that only leaves one question. what to do next? Well, of course, the Emperor and Warlord still have quite a bit of governing to do on this planet before they move on to conquer the next, but in the meantime, our Clone Force 99 could go on their own little mission. For their little mission, we're going to be sending them off in our Hammerhead warship, but we were also sure to get Warlord's brain out of there, that way we can keep him here on the surface with us. Though this mission is a bit hush-hush between the Clone Force and the Emperor, I know that whatever it is, they will do it to the best of their ability. They'll be kissing the surface goodbye for the time being and heading into the heavens to join the rest of our fleet, at least for the time being. And as we look down upon the planet with our swarm of ships engulfing it, I think it goes without saying that this place is truly ours. Though I am afraid that our Clone Force isn't going to be staying in orbit around the planet. No, they're actually going to be using our hyperdrive to go on and find their own adventure, I suppose. But before we go about doing so, we thought it might be a good idea to finally wake up our enslaved pirate crew from their hyper sleep. Perhaps they'll be of use to us and can tell us about some high-end pirate hideouts that we can go and attack in the name of the Emperor. Or, be it that they pirates, perhaps they know of some hidden treasure. Only time will tell, I suppose. But it's time for us to go now. Perhaps they'll find new, chaotic enemies to battle and new planets to conquer in the name of the Emperor. But one thing is for sure, the Empire is back.